But immediately after these election results started to become clear on Tuesday night, right after the election, on Wednesday morning, that is when the president fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions, or at least secured his prearranged resignation. Now, part of the reaction to that move by the president has been a big, loud counter-argument today that what the president did to replace Jeff Sessions at the Justice Department might have been illegal. That case was made in bold print today at the New York Times by a high-profile constitutional lawyer who is former acting Solicitor General of the United States, Neil Katyal. And his co-author in this piece is somebody who was reportedly considered to be Solicitor General in the Trump administration. His name is George T. Conway III. He's a distinguished conservative lawyer in his own right, but he is probably best known now as the husband of White House senior advisor Kellyanne Conway. Katyal and Conway argued today that while it's within the president's rights to fire Attorney General Jeff Sessions, it's not within the president's rights to install his own random, hand-picked guy to take over the Justice Department from Jeff Sessions and become the acting attorney general. Quote, because Matthew Whitaker has not undergone the process of Senate confirmation, there has been no mechanism for scrutinizing whether he has the character and ability to even-handedly enforce the law in a position of such grave responsibility. The public is entitled to that assurance, especially since Mr. Whitaker's only supervisor is President Trump himself, and the president is hopelessly compromised by the Mueller investigation. Quote, Mr. Trump's installation of Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general of the United States is unconstitutional. It is illegal, and it means that anything Mr. Whitaker does or tries to do in that position is invalid. Now, I am not a lawyer. Do not take my advice. I couldn't get you out of a parking ticket if you got a parking ticket while you were on a pogo stick. I cannot help you. But if you want to know what explains all the 3-inch tall headlines about what Trump just did here right after the election, how he was able to actually get the election results off the front pages of newspapers across the country, right? If you want to know what's got those 3-inch headlines and what's got people out in the streets and 1,000 different protests tonight and what's got all these serious legal minds and these law enforcement veterans all saying, this is the crisis we have been expecting. The reason people are freaked out is because what the president has done here basically has, again, I'm not a lawyer, but what we're seeing, the arguments here are basically constitutional concerns and criminal concerns. Constitutionally, what should have happened here under normal circumstances is that if the attorney general was going to quit or get fired, that should have activated the line of succession at the Justice Department, right? The guy who would then take over as acting attorney general for the time being would be the next in line at the Justice Department. The next in line, Senate-confirmed Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Rod Rosenstein. That did not happen. The president instead leapfrogged Rosenstein, leapfrogged that normal chain of command, and instead installed his own guy. So those are the basically vastly oversimplified constitutional concerns here. But then there's also just the very blunt question of obstruction of justice, right? We've all become like mini layman experts on obstruction of justice in the Trump era. It's within any president's right to fire or demand the resignation of any cabinet officer, including the attorney general, just like it's within the president's rights to fire or demand the resignation of the director of the FBI. Unless, of course, it turns out that the reason the president was doing either of those things is because he had a corrupt purpose in mind. He did it for the corrupt purpose of undermining a criminal investigation that he's worried might catch him or catch his family or catch his campaign or his administration. Right? It's the same. It's a pretty simple, basic principle, right? The president has the absolute right to pardon anybody in the country for any crime, but he can't do so for a corrupt purpose. He can't do so because somebody gave him $1 million to do it, right? You can do something that's within your legal rights for a non-corrupt purpose, but as soon as you take a bribe or you do it for some other corrupt purpose, well, then that's no longer within your rights. The president can fire cabinet officials, he can fire the heads of agencies, as long as he isn't doing so for the purpose of obstructing justice. So that's the reason, right, why the James Comey firing resulted in special counsel Robert Mueller being appointed. That firing investigated as potential criminal obstruction of justice by the president. Did he fire Comey in order to shut down parts of the Russia investigation that threatened the president? Similarly, if there is evidence that Attorney General Jeff Sessions was fired yesterday in an effort to block the Mueller investigation, in an effort to protect the president from that investigation. You can expect that the Sessions firing as well will ultimately come under investigation as potential criminal obstruction of justice, if it has not already. And that worry that the president might have fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions for a corrupt purpose, as part of a criminal scheme to obstruct justice, to get rid of the Mueller investigation that threatens him, that got a big boost today from the free press, when multiple news outlets started going through the record of this person who the president plucked from obscurity and installed at the head of the Justice Department to replace Jeff Sessions. Right? Obviously, from the outset, it's not a normal appointment. The normal course of events would have been to allow the number 2 at the Justice Department to take the job temporarily until somebody new was appointed. He didn't do that. Instead, he takes this guy from outside, not a Senate-confirmed guy, and plops him in there. Well, did he do that for a corrupt purpose? Let's look at what we know about this appointment. Obviously, first thing you might ask is, well, is this person qualified to do the job? He's a lawyer. He's a former U.S. attorney. The reason we have this weird video of him is because this is him promoting a neato swinging seat that you can clip onto the outside of your hot tub. We also have this odd video of him promoting bulky plastic holders for razor blades. The reason we have this weird video of Matt Whitaker is because this appears to have been Matt Whitaker's last job before landing in the Trump administration. He was on the board of and otherwise actively associated with, a company called World Patent Marketing. It no longer exists. This is a company that was shut down 6 months ago by the FTC as a criminally fraudulent scheme. The company was shut down by orders of the U.S. government, and they were ordered to pay a fine. They were ordered to pay a $26 million judgment to the FTC for being a gigantic fraud scheme, which ripped off its customers to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars each. That's where Matt Whitaker comes from. Quite recently, they paid their fine 6 months ago. He also made money as the sole full-time employee of something called FACT. FACT was funded by we don't know who, dark money donors only. He was the only employee. FACT appears to have existed for the sole purpose of giving Matt Whitaker an affiliation to put under his name when he went on cable news shows and right-wing talk radio, to be a full-time anti-Hillary Clinton, anti-Robert Mueller pundit. Over the course of this afternoon and into this evening, what has started to emerge is his extensive record of public criticism, public attacks on the Mueller investigation the president has now put him in charge of. The special counsel's investigation led by Robert Mueller into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and the question of whether the Trump campaign colluded in that attack. Mr. Whitaker has just been installed directly by President Trump to oversee that investigation. Mr. Whitaker quite clearly is a person who has already made up his mind about the key questions at the heart of that investigation.
I think we would know if there was a smoking gun, or any gun, or any smoke. I think we would know. I think we would know if there was evidence suggesting that there was a crime that happened here.
Let's assume that the president asked him to stop investigating Flynn. That doesn't rise to the level of obstruction of justice. This idea that there was some collusion with Russian nationals and even Putin to interfere and did interfere with the election, I think is just ludicrous based on what we know at this point.
The truth is there was no collusion with the Russians in the Trump campaign. There is not a single piece of evidence that demonstrates that the Trump campaign had any illegal or even improper relationships with Russians. But I mean, it's that simple. Clearly,
this is a man who has made up his mind in terms of this investigation. And that's fine. It's not a criminal act to leap to your own conclusions about what the Russia investigation will ultimately find, right? It's fine if you've made up your mind about it and declared what your made-up mind has decided about that investigation. That's fine. Unless, of course, you want to become the Justice Department official who's in charge of supervising that investigation while it is ongoing. Because that investigation is actually designed to determine factually whether or not any of those things is true. And if you've already decided and declared publicly what you believe to be true, then the one thing you can't do is oversee that investigation at the Justice Department. It's good punditry living, but you can't actually run the investigation, not for U.S. law enforcement. But those comments by Matt Whitaker and others were dug up today by the very capable Andrew Kaczynski at CNN and by a team of reporters at the Daily Beast. And hour by hour, more news outlets have been turning up more comments just like these from Matthew Whitaker, who, again, the president has just installed at the head of the Justice Department and specifically as the supervisor of the Mueller investigation. And honestly, I mean, so we know why the president has done what he's done, right? But there's another equity here, right? There's the Justice Department. And the Justice Department has rules that are supposed to prevent this sort of thing, right? The Justice Department has rules that are supposed to stop somebody who is a declared partisan about an ongoing Justice Department investigation. Somebody who's declared in no uncertain terms what he believes the outcome of that investigation should and will be. Justice Department rules don't allow a person in that circumstance to run that investigation. They have lots of processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen. And, you know, the Justice Department has to still be standing when Trump gets done with it. You know, the Justice Department is not only staffed by Donald Trump appointees, it is staffed by career prosecutors and career Justice Department officials who are not partisans, who are not rooting for one side or the other, people who are committed to the marrow of their bones, to the idea of impartial law enforcement in the United States that is not bent at will by the president to serve his own needs and to let him get away with crimes. Right? And then the president installs that guy to run that investigation. Right, so here we are. We got over 1,000 protests in every nook and cranny in the country tonight, including all 50 states. And this guy is now technically in charge of all U.S. law enforcement as of right now, including the active investigation into the president that the president personally put him in charge of after this guy denounced it publicly as a lynch mob and a witch hunt and no collusion, lock her up. The Justice Department itself as an institution just can't conceivably allow something like this to happen, right? I mean, this so defies not just the rules, but the very core principles of what the Justice Department is and why it exists. Otherwise, the president would just have his own police force, right? I mean, knowing what we know about the history of the Justice Department, presumably something breaks here in terms of this appointment as acting attorney general that the president has tried to put in place in the immediate wake of the election. Specifically, this appointee being allowed to take over what the special counsel's office is investigating. And so here's one last thing that you should know. I mentioned that a whole bunch of really important stuff happened on this issue today out loud and in the press. But there's something else today that happened in court.
The purpose of the appointment was to provide assurance to the American people that an investigation would be conducted that was sufficiently independent of the ordinary chain of command so that the United States people could have confidence in it.
That is the voice of Michael Dreeben, who is considered to be one of the top appellate lawyers in the country. He's one of the top prosecutors working under Robert Mueller in the special counsel's office. Mueller investigation basically went silent for a bunch of weeks ahead of this week's elections. That's according to Justice Department rules. But today in court, a 3-judge panel in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, they heard arguments in a Mueller case, a case that has been brought to the court specifically to try to end the Mueller investigation. This is a case we've talked about a few different times on this show. It involves a guy who once worked for Roger Stone. He's somebody nobody's heard of. His name is Andrew Miller. I believe he is a house painter in Missouri now. Mr. Miller was subpoenaed by the grand jury that is being run by the special counsel's office. He was subpoenaed to hand over documents and to testify. He rejected the subpoena. He challenged the subpoena. He said Mueller has no authority to give him a subpoena. And they have turned his case into a legal vehicle to try to have the very appointment of Robert Mueller declared unconstitutional. And as I said, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how this will go. Clearly, the plaintiffs here want this to go all the way to the Supreme Court. The lawyer for the Roger Stone guy today spoke with reporters outside today's hearing and explained bluntly that he wants this case to get to the Supreme Court as soon as possible because now Brett Kavanaugh is there. And with Brett Kavanaugh there on the court, he thinks that President Trump will get basically whatever he wants when it comes to limitations on the Russia investigation. The court hearing today, though, was not a Supreme Court hearing. It was at the D.C. Appeals Court, one level below the Supreme Court. We will see if this case ever, in fact, gets to the Supremes. But what happened today in this case, right? The day after literally a no collusion, anti-Hillary Clinton TV pundit affiliated with a large criminal fraud scheme was installed by the president personally as acting attorney general with control over the Mueller investigation. Today, one day after that guy was installed in that job, here was Mueller's team. Here was Mueller's top appeals court prosecutor explaining today in court just how much of the work of the special counsel actually has to go through, used to be Rod Rosenstein, as of yesterday, it's now this new guy, Matt Whitaker. And it's really one of the first windows we've ever had into how the Mueller team is actually supervised in the Justice Department and how somebody in the Justice Department who had authority over them might be able to try to shut them down. Just the first description that we've had, and we get it directly from one of the top prosecutors working Mueller's case. We've got tape of it. I believe we're the first people to broadcast this nationwide. The first voice you're going to hear here is one of the judges on this three-judge panel. The person who answers the questions is Michael Dreeben from the special counsel's office.
Can I just ask you a couple of detailed questions on the constitutional question,
yes,
and specifically about the way that supervision is exercised? So there's the provision that talks about the Attorney General finding that something the special counsel wants to do is so inappropriate or unwarranted under established department practices that it should not be pursued.
Correct.
Do you understand that to mean that if the Attorney General makes that assessment, then that the special counsel can't take the step?
We do.
If the Attorney General makes that assessment, decides something is inappropriate or unwarranted, then the special counsel can't take that step? Yes. So Michael Dreeben from the special counsel's office, from Mueller's office, saying bluntly to the court that the special counsel's office can't just do what it wants. If the acting attorney general tells them, no, what you're doing is inappropriate or unwarranted under established Justice Department practices, then that acting attorney general can stop Mueller from doing anything. And of course, yesterday, President Trump just installed a new acting attorney general.
The special counsel has a regular reporting obligation to the acting attorney general in order to maintain the acting attorney general's ultimate accountability for the investigation. That's one of the twin purposes of the regulation. Ultimate accountability in the attorney general, day-to-day independence of the special counsel. We are therefore required to submit reports to the acting attorney general in accordance with the Department of Justice's urgent report guidelines, which, without going into all their detail, ensure that major events and investigations are reported up the chain of command so that supervisory officials in the department are aware of them. The regulations also specifically provide that the acting attorney general can ask the special counsel for an explanation of any investigatory step. So he's aware of what we're doing, and he can ask for an explanation of it. It is not the case that the special counsel is off wandering in a free-floating environment and can decide on his own when to report. There's a reporting obligation.
He's aware of what we're doing, and he can ask for an explanation for it. There's a reporting obligation. This top prosecutor from Mueller's office saying that all major events in the special counsel's office investigation, all major stuff, has to be reported up the chain of command, so that supervisory officials in the department are aware of those major events. Quote, ultimate accountability lies in the attorney general, in this case, the acting attorney general. This is why it is such a big deal that President Trump has just installed his new hand-picked guy, who is an avowed enemy of Mueller's investigation, to be the guy in charge of Mueller's investigation.
But if the acting attorney general concludes, in words that afford him a fair amount of discretion, that an action is so inappropriate, to a degree of inappropriateness, or unwarranted, that it shall not be pursued, he can step in and say otherwise.
So it's not that then it just triggers a reporting obligation on the part of the Attorney General to report it to the Senate.
That's right.
It's that the Attorney General can actually prevent the action from happening.
That is our understanding of the regulations. The preamble to the regulations makes clear that that is part of the arsenal of powers that the acting attorney general has.
It's not just that they have to report if they do something, they can actually stop you from doing it. Okay? The arsenal of powers that the acting attorney general has are the kinds of powers one would not expect the Justice Department to allow to be placed into the hands of somebody who is completely personally compromised when it comes to overseeing an investigation of the president. But the president is trying it. And that's why there were 1,000 protests in all 50 states across the country tonight. This is what we've been waiting for. It turns out to be a test for the country. It turns out to be a test, first and foremost, of the Justice Department. What are they going to do here? Congressman Elijah Cummings joins us next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.